Welcome back. We've been talking about crime and poverty and inequality in the United States and how bad it is. Well, and we'll get back to those conversations, and I'll be picking up your phone calls here in about 10 minutes. But all of that is, in our conversation up to this point has been, centered on the United States. But there are other places around the world that are plagued by the same problem, where you have rich people who are essentially predatory, who extract as much wealth as possible from everybody else. And then you have this massive inequality, and then that tears apart social fabric and destroys social trust. And then you have crime. And I mean, it's being repeated all over the world. And now, right off our coast, one of the countries that has been chronically going through this kind of a problem. When I interviewed the former Prime Minister of Haiti last week on this program, I believe I pointed out to him that our organization, with this German organization I was working with, tried to start a project with Haiti, and the government minister that we were dealing with would not work with us unless we paid him a bribe. I mean, this is how terrible it was there. And yet, this is in large part the problems there are in large part a creation of the United States. And I didn't even know, and Greg Palast is with us, our old buddy, the investigative journalist, the author of How Trump Stole 2020, gregpalast.com, of course, his website, Greg_Palast on Twitter. Greg, I didn't know until I read your piece, and I'm sure somebody has mentioned it somewhere, that George W. Bush dragged us into another, what would you call it? Opportunistic, imperialistic, whatever, involvement in Haiti.
It's a coup d'etat. I mean, he wasn't satisfied with stealing his own election. So in 2004, Haiti, after the U.S. backed a dictatorship for 28 years, Baby Doc and Papa Doc Duvalier, we backed a dictatorship. They finally elected a president, the Catholic priest Jean-Bertrand Aristide. And then we fomented a group of characters, a gang which called themselves the Cannibals. And I guess that Bush's PR people said, no, give yourself another name. So they changed the name from Cannibals to the National Revolutionary Front for the Liberation of Haiti. Bush sent in 1,000 Marines and went to the office of President Aristide and said, "You're going, you're out." So again, he was stealing his second election in the U.S., so he decided to steal Haiti's while he was at it with 1,000 Marines. And by the way, Aristide, when the Marines broke into his office, was reading a book called "The Best Democracy Money Can Buy."
Seriously, your book?
Asked me to Yeah, so I know that because he asked me if I could send him another copy because the Marines took it from him.
Oh my God!
So I'm not kidding.
Is he still alive?
So he was. Oh, indeed, he just returned this weekend back to Haiti. He's in his 90s. He was recovering from COVID in Cuba, and so what happened was, besides after the 1,000 Marines were sent in, and we replaced him with another puppet. He ultimately came back, anyway, go right ahead if you have other questions about.
Well, no, my recollection is that President Aristide was what today we would call a social democrat or democratic socialist, somebody who believed in democracy, but also believed that you have to have a strong social safety net in order to have a society work, and just like or similarly. It wasn't the Contras, it was the Sandinistas in Central America who were ending up, ultimately having to align themselves with Cuba and the Soviet Union because we were just trashing them. Who were saying, we're
embargoes, yes, yeah,
we're all in favor of democracy. We just want to have a strong social safety net. And the Reagan administration and others said, but specifically Ronald Reagan said, strong social safety net that's socialism. That's communism. You can't have that. I mean, it's like the record that he made for the AMA back in the 1960s, about Medicare, saying someday we'll look back and remember when men were free. But I also recall that Aristide lived far more humbly than his predecessors, than the Duvaliers, and made a point of that, that he put into place a lot of very positive social changes in Haiti. What happened to those?
Well, what happened is the U.S. imposed an embargo because, unlike the Duvaliers, which we kept in power, he didn't steal billions. He lived poor. He was very humble, but the nation was busted, especially because it was devastated. 80% of the foreign aid was looted by the Duvaliers. The U.S. cut off aid, so he turned to Venezuela, which gave the nation over $2 billion plus low-cost oil under a program created by Hugo Chavez called PetroCaribe. Now the lately deceased president Moises, who was murdered last week or a week and a half ago, he looted some of that money brought in by Venezuela, according to the Haitian Supreme Court, one of the few institutions which is still honest and functioning. We have to understand there's a long history here. I mean, then they had the earthquake of 2010. We were supposed to bail them out. Instead, Obama created something called the Bush-Clinton Haitian Relief Fund. You can tell by just the name that it's a grifter operation, which tried to set up some beach resorts for white tourists, but nothing for the Haitians. You have to understand that today, 67% of the people of Haiti, 67% earn $2 a day or less.
Whoa!
And this tragedy has a long history. And by the way, it didn't help that in 1791, Toussaint Louverture led the first successful mass slave uprising that led to the creation of Haiti.
Yeah.
In the Americas. And what happened was the French government. This is the first time that we had reparations for slavery. What it was the slaves in Haiti were required to pay $21 billion in payments to the French slaveholders, to the French government and the slaveholders, for the loss of their so-called property, that is, the citizens of Haiti. And that continued through 1947. So literally they were paying, the slaves are paying, the former enslaved people were paying their slaveholders in France. That finally came to an end, but not the economic slavery. That was replaced by another form of economic slavery called the IMF, which said since Haiti's poor, what they need to do is impose an austerity program and privatize all their industries, water, electricity, et cetera, so there's no water or electricity. So this is a nation we have brutalized. When I say, not you and me, Tom, and not your listeners, but we've
all been participants in the system that has brutalized them. I mean, and that gives us, I think, an obligation to do or say something about it. I had, the Aristide part of the history of Haiti, I knew at the time. I mean, I was alive and paying attention to the media, but was not top of mind for me recently. I didn't realize that you knew Jean-Baptiste Aristide, if I'm saying it right. Jean-Baptiste
and Aristide, and he was taken off to a French colony in Africa, and he was able to get away and return, get reelected. It's interesting. The U.S. government, the U.S. State Department, this guy Moise, and by the way, no one in Haiti, not me, and no one in Haiti is thrilled about the idea that their president was gunned down.
Right.
But the truth is, he was a rump president. His term in office ended last year.
Right.
And he refused to leave office.
He pulled a Trump.
Yeah, and what happened was that the U.S. State Department backed him in holding on to office.
Yeah.
This guy who was, in fact, not only was he stealing the aid money given by Venezuela, but he was using some of that money to pay off gangs. The place is controlled by the G9, which means the 9 gangs. And he was paying the 9 gangs to beat up anti-government demonstrators.
Amazing.
Gunned some down.
Craig, I understand that Haiti is going to be having elections soon. We're almost out of time here, by the way. Is there another Aristide, another democratic socialist who has the possibility of winning that election and putting that country back together and hopefully without the United States interfering again?
Oh, there are really good activists who are following, Aristide was a liberation theologist, and there are the poverty priests there still there who are working hard and putting their lives on the line. Whether they stand a chance or whether we are going to continue to back governments which are themselves backed by gangs, literally the 9 gangs. That's the real issue. Whether Haiti will ever be allowed to be free, I don't know.
Yeah, it's such a tragedy, and another example. I mean, our involvement in Iraq, our involvement in Iran, our involvement in Haiti, our involvement in you just pick a country, right? Central America. Greg Palast, gregpalast.com, the website. Great op-ed that Greg put together with the whole timeline of Haiti. You can check it out. Greg, thanks a lot. It's great talking with you.